political analyst Tom Gross is in Tel Aviv. Welcome, Tom. Thank you so much for being with us. Before we get to the political messages that we've just heard, let's start with the morning developments. Hamas has released all the living hostages as agreed. The process is ongoing when it comes to the bodies of the deceased hostages. How has this news resonated in Israel?
Well, yes, definitely in the morning, people were ecstatic. It's been a very emotional day. The hostages come from a cross section of Israeli society. Their parents are things like teachers, secretaries from all different geographic regions, religious, secular. So this really affected the whole of Israel, and people were very, very happy. And also, they were relieved that, at least on the face of it, the conditions of the 20 released hostages were not as bad as feared. They could all walk. And indeed, one of them, Alon Ohel, who's a pianist, has even managed to play the piano in hospital this afternoon. So there's relief on that front. But on the other note, Hamas were meant to release 28 bodies of people they murdered in Gaza, hostages they murdered. They've only released 4. They claim they can't find the others, but this is almost certainly a lie because they said only last week that they knew where the majority were. And it looks like they're playing games, which they've done before. Israel says it's a blatant breach of the agreement by Hamas. And especially for those with religious families, proper burial is extremely important. So, we also see that Hamas has been reasserting itself on the streets of Gaza in areas Israel has left. 7,000 armed Hamas militia appeared on the streets yesterday, and at least 20 Palestinian opponents to Hamas were executed in public view to make it clear to the population who's in control. So Hamas, unfortunately, it doesn't look like they're going to disarm. It doesn't look like the war is over for them. And holding on to dead bodies, and possibly, according to some reports, one of the dead hostages may still be alive. Looks like Hamas are holding on to bargaining chips to keep the war going in some way or other.
Let's move on to the messages that we've heard from the Knesset today. Donald Trump was welcomed with high praise, many rounds of applause. When he did begin his speech, he said that a new dawn is upon the Middle East. Netanyahu and Lapid thanked him for his peace plan. What do you make of the messages from the Israeli parliament?
Yes, it was a very optimistic, upbeat speech by Trump, in which he really did speak of peace rather than war and of resolving conflict. And I think he feels that if he just plants the seeds of peace and optimism, hope will grow. And if he says enough times there can be peace, and he mentioned peace from Iran to Gaza across the Middle East, if he says this enough times and he wills it, it can come about. And, in turn, the Speaker of the Knesset called Trump the president of peace and said the world needs more Trumps. And, things look quite optimistic. They both did, and also I should add, Trump offered the hands of friendship and future relations with Iran as well. And also Netanyahu made quite a lot of positive promises. He quoted from the Bible, said there's a time for peace and a time for war, and this was the time for peace, and that together with Trump, they would expand on the Abraham Accords and the number of peace deals Israel has with Arab and other Muslim states. So at least on the face of it, this was an optimistic speech by Trump.
There was a brief interruption when one of the MPs held up a paper calling for Trump to recognize Palestine. Another MP picked up a paper that said genocide. They were quickly escorted out of the hall. Now, obviously, 2 MPs don't make a parliament, but do you see any more calls for Palestinian recognition from within Israel if the ceasefire indeed holds and the peace plan moves ahead?
Well, the 2 MPs or MKs that were heckled and then were removed from the chamber today are real extremists. Well, the one calling for Palestinian state is a communist, in fact, and he doesn't believe in any states should exist, including Israel. In answer to your question, many people in Israel support a Palestinian state in theory, but they only want a state if it will lead to peace and not to a worse war than the war that has just finished now. between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. So it's not a question of belief in a Palestinian state. It's a question of which circumstances. I mean, there are many states that could come into being in the world, but it depends how they'll come into being, whether they'll be that democracies have peaceful intent and so on. So I think it is definitely a bit premature to talk about a Palestinian state, but something down the line is definitely a possibility.
Well, when it comes to circumstances, a lot is yet unknown, including the sticking points of Hamas disarmament and the future governance of Gaza, full Israeli withdrawal from the Strip. Do you see these negotiations moving ahead in a proper fashion, unlike those we've seen collapse during the previous ceasefire, especially now with such strong U.S. involvement?
Well, in theory, this is a much more solid plan than in previous ceasefires that have fallen apart because many Western and Arab countries have signed on to it, and even countries with which Israel doesn't have relations, like Pakistan and Indonesia, to important Muslim non-Arab countries. And Trump is very involved. So in theory, it should move ahead. But as your question suggested, by asking what Hamas had done to undermine it, the problem is Hamas. Hamas doesn't believe in peace. It doesn't believe in the existence of Israel. It doesn't believe in a non-Islamic Palestinian state. It believes in an Islamic state. And everything in the peace plan, all 20 points, is conditional on Hamas giving up power and giving up arms. And I'm not quite sure how that's going to happen now that Israel has withdrawn. I'm not quite sure that we can see any other peacekeeping force with Egyptians or Indonesians or whatever take on these Hamas gunmen.
Trump's plan
still,
does stipulate an
yeah.
international contingent, an international force in the Gaza Strip, as well as a major role for for the Palestinian Authority, of course, conditioned on further reforms. Just as we're speaking right now, over in Sharm el-Sheikh, the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, is there for the peace summit. Is the PEA a response, an answer? Would that be welcomed by Israel?
Well, according to the Trump plan, the PA needs to reform itself. It needs to moderate itself. And in that case, it would be welcomed by Israel. Israel doesn't want any armed force on its borders from which it can launch attacks. The last 2 years, it's not just about hostages. Israel has been rocketed or bombed or droned from Lebanon, from Iraq, from Yemen, and most of all from Iran, of course, and most of all from Gaza. For the last 2 years, people have had to run to bomb shelters pretty much every day and night. So they don't mind the Palestinian Authority, Israelis in Gaza, so long as it's properly committed to peace, and that is unclear.
Well, when it comes to commitment to peace, Netanyahu told Knesset that he is committed to peace. Can Israelis trust Netanyahu?
Well, the society is very divided about Netanyahu, but there will be elections next year. And what I want to say is, in a full-fledged democracy like Israel, politicians have to respond to the electorate. So a previous hardline Likud Prime Minister, Menachem Begin, came in on a hardline promise, having said he will not make peace with Egypt. And a year or two later, Israel and Egypt make peace. They both got the Nobel Peace Prize. That's Begin and Sadat. So I think Netanyahu reacts. Look, he made four peace deals in recent years, the Abraham Accords with UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, and he wants to make more. So it's not a question of trusting Netanyahu to make peace. Netanyahu's ethos, which was cited by Trump in Trump's speech today, is peace through strength. About 30 years ago, Netanyahu wrote a book called Peace Through Strength. So Netanyahu does believe in peace, but he doesn't believe in appeasement. So he believes in peace with security guarantees, especially for Israel, because even though Israel has had military successes now in the last year or two, it's still a tiny little country, one Jewish state. surrounded by 22 Arab states and about 30 more Muslim states who have much more money and much more arms. So from Israel's point of view, it's not about trusting Netanyahu, it's about having a strong army and military. And what I want to say is if there would be a real peace offer there, and Netanyahu wouldn't respond in a positive way, he'll be voted out of office, or in the coalition that always exists in Israel, coalition parties will defect to the opposition who will want peace. The Knesset responds. Netanyahu is not a dictator.
Tom, thank you so much for joining us and providing us with your insight.
Thank you. Have a good day.